Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I am Donna Adamanchuk, and we are here with Lee Norris as well with Change Innovators. And those of you who have listened to our podcast before know that we love to explore topics around leadership and growth. And the thing that Lee and I truly believe is that we are all leaders. We can step into that leadership role when we in any position that we take. So growing your leadership team, I'd like you to think of team just as even your peers. I'd like you to think about it if you have an official title or you sort of seem to take on that natural initiative informally, because every team has a formal and an informal leader on it. And so depending upon how you see yourself and how others see you, we hope you can connect with the material today. So growing your leadership team, Lee.
Right.
What's our first question today?
I really like the first word on this, because when I'm coaching people sometimes, or when we're early in the stages of doing some of the work that we do, people can sometimes talk about improvement or getting, being better at something, or that I'm not very good at that. And I always try to encourage people to think of the word as growth rather than improvement. It's a more positive, less judgmental way of looking at the world for me. Yeah, just as a sort of opening to that. So maybe a good place to start is understanding, well, what do we mean by growth? Growing a team, what does that mean? Because sometimes people might think, oh, I've got a team of 10, maybe I need to grow to a team of 20. And maybe that is true. Maybe that is part of growth. Where I was thinking about this, first of all, today was really about growing as leaders and understanding what growing as a leader actually means. And there were a couple of things that came to mind. So one thing was about emotional intelligence and understanding how is it possible to actually measure your emotional intelligence and to understand about your emotional makeup in a way that's really tangible and allows you to understand where you may have, sometimes I describe it as emotional muscles. Some of them are more exercised than others, so bigger than others, and then be able to lean into that, as opposed to IQ, which is all about what A levels you've got, is it in the UK, or high school diplomas or degrees or master's degrees. We can measure those things and they're kind of there in the world of business, but actually then they don't necessarily lead to success, and we talk about this quite often. But EQ does play quite a big role, and we use a particular tool, right? We use the EQI 2.0 tool, which does measure emotional intelligence. And I don't know about your experience, Donna, but my experience with it is that sometimes people are really flawed. They're kind of, as in they are flawed people, but they're really kind of like, oh my God, I didn't realize that my emotional intelligence was there. I thought I was more emotionally intelligent than that. It can be a reaction. And sometimes those people are quite senior very senior in their roles, because they've never really paid attention to what EQ means. They know about it, but they've never paid attention to it. So that for me is a real key part of growth. Any thoughts?
I think the space between growth and humility is interesting, because the other day in our PLDP, which is the last module of our program where people present their learnings back, something they said was really impactful to me. Many of them were, but this one comment regarding EQ was the idea of, the self-regard, which is one of the first things we sometimes ponder in our EQ, is that ability, I always say, to understand my strengths and my warts, but it's actually that ability to be able to identify what you are doing well in a group. So doing it in a way where your ego, which I know we're going to explore a little bit more, your ego doesn't really show up as much, but in a way for you to be able to say that, yes, I have accomplished this. And instead of just saying, I'm the only one, anyone could do it, no big deal, anyone could do it. That's kind of sometimes what we've been taught to dismiss, but to say that I chose to do it. I took the necessary steps and commitment and resilience to grow as a person. And that has allowed me to do that. Other people could do it, but that's a choice they get to make. And I think for me, sort of that EQ of understanding sometimes those small nuances of how we show up that way and then how that impacts how we develop and grow our teams is important as well.
Yeah,
because if we
absolutely.
list things all the time as anybody could do them, because often most things, except maybe going to the moon might be a little bit more, but most things in the world we can actually, we could all do.
Yeah, and certainly with emotional intelligence, if you put your mind to it and you put your attention to it, you can grow.
And you work around the wheel of the EQ. There's many of those areas that can allow you to accomplish those things. Self-actualization, yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, and okay, so you've just brought to mind another thing. So one of the components of EQ is called problem solving, which I really like. I really like that one, because sometimes people get a lower score in problem solving and they go, but I'm really good at problem solving. And we're like, yeah, I'm sure you are really good at problem solving. But within the EQ component, it's not about the intellectual capability to solve problems. It's about the ability to regulate yourself emotionally in the process of solving problems. Often I don't know if you agree or not with this, but my experience certainly is that in organizations, there's a lot of emotion involved with problem solving. People have strong feelings about the oddest things, like which system they want to buy, or I want to work with that person in this team, or all different sorts of things. So the EQ component in there is about how it's an understanding of how well you can regulate yourself, or how you choose to regulate yourself in the process of solving problems. Part of that for me also is having a healthy relationship with problems and problem solving. So sometimes, because we attach ourselves to the outcomes of things in the real 3D world out there, sometimes people internalize those problems as well, so that they see them as part of themselves. And that for me would be what I might call a less healthy way of engaging with problems, because then if something goes wrong, then people can feel like they've gone wrong. And it can be a really personal feeling. So it's not a problem to have emotional engagement in problem solving, but it's about maintaining a healthy emotional engagement with problem solving. So these things are quantifiable. We can measure them to give you a rounded picture of who you are emotionally. I often describe it to people as being crazy to think that you can measure people in these 15 components of the EQI 2.0, but also really, and it's quite elegant, because one of the things it does is allows the average person to lean into some of these quite complicated, very nuanced things around emotional makeup and make sense of them for themselves and other people. It's really important to me, anyway.
And what we do, I think we both find that the problem solving, what do we mean by growth and growth of a team, is the ability to be able to just work through situations, right? Like when someone says, well, it's not, we're going to solve it, we're going to solve it, we're going to solve it. It's like you're giving it so much energy, whereas it's just situations come up, we're going to figure about it, and really paying attention to the adjectives that we use when we're describing things. And for me, that's that emotional connection sometimes to them. And then, saying to somebody, or because we would do in coaching, like, how come you chose that word? And so as you're starting to grow your team and you're starting to want to explore the EQ side of it, sometimes that ability to be able to slow down and say, like, why when we talk about this, do you use that word? Because I wouldn't use that word. And I find like that growth can come in a team by sort of being able to start to understand why you're so attached to a word to describe something, and then just the emotions that come with that. Because we go to the outcome, but we don't know. For me, it's the adjectives, and it's trying to understand that component of it and exploring that myself sometimes, so I can see why I'm bringing what I am. So what's the next question?
Well, just before we move on to the next question, can I do something that leads into the next question? Because I think that EQ is part of it, but the other part of it is about mindset and orientation, leadership orientation to learning. And in our first module, we talk about this when what predicts success. We talk about this orientation towards a learning goal. Am I learning goal orientated? And we also talk about proactivity orientation. So, it's about an attitude towards being open to learning and being proactive at learning. And it's possible that sometimes when leaders are incredibly busy, or they feel, well, I'm kind of, I've made it now. It's possible that they might think, well, I've got nothing else to learn. Then that starts to challenge our definition, certainly my understanding of leadership. So then, if it's okay, I can pop that question up now. What prevents leaders from learning? There we go. There's the question. Where should we go with this one?
Oh, I don't know. I'm curious just for people to think about it before you and I, when they're listening, when we're engaging with us in this. I hope you're not listening versus I hope the audience is engaging in the conversation, because I see them as very different. What prevents us from learning? I know I believe that people expect us to show up a certain way. And when we don't sometimes fit into that way, they don't know what to do, because when you start to grow and develop yourself, it can be uncomfortable for people when you are showing up in a different way.
Yeah.
And so if there's someone that you sort of had somewhat of a combative, we always debate, we're really good at debating things, and you've decided, I don't feel like debating anymore with that person. I'm going to take a different approach. I understand the impact that has on me emotionally. I understand the impact it has on others around us. When you actually no longer engage in that, the other person doesn't know what to do anymore. So sometimes what prevents leaders from learning is that they feel that people expect them to show up in one way. They expect them to put on a suit every day, right? Like, that's how I show up every day. I show up in certain behaviors. And if I wasn't to do that, then, and I think you probably have some other quotes that you could connect. I think, when we spoken about, you could share, but
I do think that expectation can play a really significant role in learning, because if the orientation to learning also involves perception by others, then that in its own way can be problematic. And so we talk on our program, we talk about a couple of things. So Brené Brown's got a great quote that we sometimes talk about, which is what stands in the way becomes the way. And also kind of fairly famous medical scientist Claude Bernard said, it's what we think we know already that often prevents us from learning. And he sort of devised that saying on the basis of holding back scientific discovery, that when the moment we believe that we know something, it can really get in the way of progress. That's where he came from in that theory. So both of those things to me have an orientation towards the inner world as opposed towards the expectation of others, which I'm not saying that isn't valid. It is valid, but it's what we already know, or what stands in the way are things within us that we hold on to or choose not to step into because there's some form of discomfort, maybe, or whatever the right way of looking at that is, that gets in the way. I remember when I was working in with really senior people working on really big programs of change and work, and sometimes people come in to be a sponsor, say, of a big project, but they're not familiar with the language of projects. Is one example. So what happens is you've got leaders come in, all of these people talking in a language that they actually don't really understand, and that I had lots of sessions with people that said, blimey, on a one-to-one, I didn't really understand a word of what was being said, but I didn't feel that I could speak up because I am supposed to be showing leadership. And the question for me that fell out of that was, well, does leadership involving knowing everything and having to be seen to be right, or knowing all the answers? And in lots of cases, I actually do believe that that holds people back from learning. They can't say, I don't understand, or could you tell me what you mean by that?
So I think it's a combination, though, because when you do ask a question, some people say, well, let me take you all the way back to the beginning. And it's like, now you're getting a lecture. And so the one thing I find, and what I've learned over as a person who wants to facilitate adult learning and growth in people, is that the person who's asked the question in the room is not always asking it for themselves.
Yes.
And then the importance of being able to maybe ask some clarifying questions so you can figure out which part of that they actually need to understand. And so to be able to understand that and to create that space so others can see it, right? We talk about the importance of, as a leader, being a role model. So asking questions is teaching people it's okay to ask questions, and we're not going to shame you. But to be able to start to understand more about when someone asks a question, it doesn't mean that they need to go back to A, and it doesn't mean they need a lecture. It's asking those types of things. So if your SME brain kicks in and you need to be the expert in the room and that's your role, avoid it. Like if you are the expert on that conversation, I'm going to encourage you, as a person wanting to build a team, I'm going to encourage you to say, yes, I am the SME in that area. What I need to know is really what that person wants. So what could be my next question to say, where in the process would you like me to start? Or what is it that I said today that has asked you to be, what's causing you to be more curious? Instead of like, what don't you know? Really starting to understand the value of curiosity versus I don't know.
You remind, I was terrible when I was younger at that, by the way, taking people back to first principles all the time. I imagine now when I think back about it, people must have thought, oh God, here he goes again. So I'm gonna self-confess to that one. It is interesting. It is interesting that sometimes that desire that people have to explain the context or go back is equally a kind of lack of awareness, in a sense of really what is the real question here, what's being asked, and again that comes back to to this idea of growth, that being open to the idea that, well, maybe the way I'm approaching this isn't working, so how might I need to kind of lean into that. And I love when people ask
questions, we also become defensive. It's that internal ego, it's that internal space of like, whatever this person is doing. I know there's a different word in, I think the technical word that when there's other words, but the idea of is that someone starts talking and we actually go into preservation mode, a fear mode, because we're like, how much more work is this going to take? What is it actually going to do? Right. And so kind of a important thing to realize what part of fear is causing me to prevent myself from learning.
Yeah. And again, it's possible that also links back to that problem solving EQ, in that sometimes, if the ability to self-regulate, the ability to recognize that because somebody said something or they're doing something, if I'm becoming frustrated or dysregulated, that is also about understanding, well, becoming curious about, well, why is that? Is it because I feel I already know that, or that I'm, that I'm, what is the old saying, teaching granny to suck eggs or whatever? Sometimes that can be a bit of a trigger for people. But also we do, you mentioned the word shame, and I just thought I'd come back to that, because I think that sometimes that desire not to feel shamed, that if I ask a question, am I in some sense diminishing myself? Will that vulnerability, showing a bit of vulnerability and saying, I'm not sure I understand that, actually, what will that evoke in other people? Is it going to be that they're going to think less of me, or are they going to lean in and go, oh, there's an opportunity here to kind of like explain something that I know that somebody else doesn't? So, but you never know that until you kind of create the the space for yourself to step into that space and be able to ask those questions, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Also, a couple of other things, I suppose. One is that sometimes when people are in senior positions, they don't have to be in senior positions. It could just be people who get stuck, that they have their own confirmation bias. They want to go in a particular direction, and they'll only want to listen to people that are agreeing with what they're saying. That's quite common.
Well, even sometimes when you identify that there is a hiccup in a system, and it seems like it should be easy to fix, and it's then it's this other person's responsibility, but that actually doesn't address the fact that it is part of the system, and it is a hiccup in our system. Like it's like, oh, this has come to an attention that has never come to the attention before.
Mm-hmm.
And to actually be able to say, oh yeah, that's something we need to fix. I can't do it today. So even that acknowledgement, when somebody asks a question, acknowledging that it really is a problem. Mm-hmm. I can't do anything about it today. So, but by next week or, next month, I'll put it on my thing and I'll look at it. That ability of a leader to be able to acknowledge the truth, because someone's like, my situation is the truth. I can show it to you repetitively that it's the truth of data. And then to be able to actually not just say, well, this is the system. And I think that's the thing about building a team. We need to take those small moments. We need to listen. We need to get out of our own bias, problem-solving bias. We do need to be more work for somebody on the team. But the reality is it could be fixed, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know about you, but I've never met somebody in a leadership position where if they have an area of responsibility where there wasn't some form of problem going on, in a day-to-day
everyday life.
I just, whether it's the kind of a key person's currently unavailable because they're off sick, or because there's fundamentally a problem. And yet, people can find it very difficult to acknowledge. And I think some of that is down to the fact that in organizations, we force ourselves to take responsibility for things that we can't possibly be responsible for.
Yes.
And then we're held accountable by other people to things that we can't be responsible for. Now, I think that's quite controversial, but I also believe it to be true. And I think it really gets in the way of having honest conversations when these things happen, because if you feel like you're going to be judged, or you feel like you're going to some way be diminished because there's a problem in your area, in inverted commas, I think that can become hugely problematic, in teams and with leaders and organizations overall. And it prevents growth. And as you say, you have to overcome the confirmation bias, your kind of filter bubble, whatever way people want to call it, the ego, this desire to kind of be right. And also, I'm mindful of Mike, Michael Thompson, our one of our other company owners and coaches, in his neuroscience lens, will be saying, and our brains are brilliant. I mean, they basically plasticize themselves to get simple pathways to solutions. And once that's done, we have a learned path, to things. So it's not as easy as saying, I just can change my mind about something. Sometimes these things are really hardwired, and it takes effort to change our minds, and our brains don't want to naturally put loads of effort into changing things. So, maintaining this sort of thing is hard work. Okay.
I want to do one more thing about that, because I do think sometimes it comes in people appreciate when I bring this concept up, is we talk about people being fluid and we talk about growth. One of the things to ponder is that thing that there's certain values that I hold. I'm not going to talk about people that I don't want to change. And there's other values or things that I have changed over my lifetime because of experiences and have changed me. But when we start talking about when people say, they can just change those pathways, there's certain values that are important that they really want to honor. And so when you're sitting as a team and you're sitting there, there's the emotional side to it. There's values and emotions I feel go together. And then there's the logical side, but understanding that we all bring our own values to the table. Organizations have values. Sometimes they're in line, sometimes they're not. And so those also prevent leaders from learning, because they feel like they're they feel like sometimes that's a lot of effort, or to have those conversations as well, right? Like if their values have to be adjusted, or they're being stretched in different ways as well. I mean, we talk about emotions, but I do find that people appreciate when we talk about that we all have values, and some of them are pretty strong.
Yeah, some of them are really strong.
But I just want to bring up.
Yeah, when I'm debriefing people on their EQ, I also open up their driving forces report, and we kind of look at them together.
Nice.
And you know, because driving forces, the values and belief systems that we have, they're not passive. You know, they're kind of you go twanging on one of those, and suddenly you really can feel it. And you know, and what I try to describe to people is that, you know, it's the values are our values and belief systems are very powerful because they kind of motivate us, but it's the way we feel about things that compels us to act. So if somebody's pushed a button on one of your values and that's annoyed you, you're going to act annoyed. Whereas if somebody's in alignment with your values and they kind of go, yeah, you're really brilliant, you are, you know, you kind of, people lean into that, and they can sort of, you know, because it makes them feel good. It's not as simple as that, but you know, you're right. There's a huge amount of overlap between the, you know, values and belief systems, and what we call driving forces, and the EQ and our emotional makeup that kind of is always there and rarely visible.
Yes, we often would get it wrong, I think.
Yeah. Cool. So let's just look at this last question. Okay, so we've been nattering on now about EQ and about attitudes to learning and all sorts of things. And we started off talking about growth in teams. So I was thinking about this when I put this question together. So why is this important? And, you know, practically, what is it that I can do if I want to have a more growth orientation, a growth or proactivity orientation towards my leadership? You know, where is the focus for me? And then I had a thought, which I'll share with you, because again, these are my thoughts. But I felt that a good place to start is with self-awareness. You know, working on self-awareness and understanding yourself, the impact that you have on others. Emotional intelligence and self-awareness is part of EQ, right? But, you know, thinking about how emotionally intelligent I am. And then the third thing is about human connection, which is a key part of what we are about as a company. Because if you have higher levels of self-awareness and you are emotionally more well-rounded, it's possible, not 100% maybe, that the human connection and the working at the human level becomes more possible for you, because you're more aware of your own humanity and the potential of other people's human traits, constraints, or, you know, whatever else way that you want to look at the world. Because in my view, put simply, we focus too much on intellect and not enough on some of these other things. We quantify intellect, but we don't quantify some of these other things enough, and that's what we do in our work. We try to help people with that. Because if you create an environment where people feel safe, they grow and they become more productive.
Yeah, so that we use the word safe, and the word I connect more to always is just belonging. You know, like if all I know things about someone is surface level, then it's kind of like it's nice to know people and you can be friendly and things like that. But those surface level conversations get really difficult, and it's very hard to build a team when you're on surface level. Like if the conversation's always surface level, but that ability to actually be able to connect with somebody in a different way, or to be able to connect with somebody and just say, hey, like everything, like you could just tell there's something going on with somebody, but you know that you don't need to know the story. But even being able to find a way to connect with them, we often feel like we need to know the story to make a connection. But even the ability to connect with somebody when you notice a change in the way they're showing up, and just checking in on them can be an important part for someone to feel like they belong. The person is me. They see that I'm not having a great day, but they're also letting me belong because they know I don't want to. They know I don't want to share, and they're making that okay. Like, it's an interesting thing to be able to do that on a team, and then be able to connect with people that way. So why is this important? Because we need belonging on teams. People need to be known that they're more than their to-do list or their outputs, right? People really want to feel like you want them there. I'm glad you're here.
Yeah. And when we finish our first module as well, when we've done that basic exploration of leadership, there's something that we put up on the screen, and we say leadership is about personal and professional growth and development. That's what it is, because every time a new member of your team joins, or somebody's done a training course and they've kind of had this massive revelation and they kind of whatever else, the ability to do what you just said and greet them and welcome people where they're at, and not impose our own sets of values and belief systems on people because we're desperate to try and achieve something or do something, and to maybe to be seen as the person who has to drive things. Again, probably quite controversial, but actually when you experience where there's a better balance in teams, productivity tends to be much higher and people tend to be a lot happier. Where people can prioritize their own well-being and self-care alongside the doing of the work, then outcomes are better.
Yeah, and I do believe, Lee, and I think I can speak for Lee and I here, but I'll speak for myself, is that I definitely hope I can go through my day, and I'm not saying I do it 100% of the time because that would be not true. But I do hope I do it 95 or 98% of the time, that whoever is sitting around me, I'm just making their day better, taking an interest in them, or we're having an impact on others. And those small moments is what creates growth for me. I'm a big believer that it's the pebbles that grow. That's the type of habit I like to practice, the small pebbles. Small pebbles lead to big things. And that's kind of how I see this topic.
I love that, because it's like shifting the narrative away from do no harm to try and do some good.
Yeah. If I can try and do that majority of the time, then that's my goal. So
what a great way to finish.
You want to wrap us up? And
yeah. So we talked about growth and leadership today, and the two things are side by side. I mean, ultimately, I think the thing to take away, I believe, is that leadership is a practice and it never finishes. It's an ongoing process of learning and really leaning into those areas where growth is possible, because we never stop growing if we put our attention to it.
Yeah. Excellent.
There we go.
Thank you very much. Have a great day, everybody. Ciao.
Yeah, we'll see you next time. Take care.